Okay, we are back in regular session or back from the closed session. Christian, do you have a report to make, please?
There was one item on the closed session agenda. The council discussed and provided some direction, and there's nothing further to report.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're gonna be, we've got about 3 minutes before we're gonna pick up for the 5 o'clock portion. We got 3 minutes.
It's just an ad. I thought it was a invoice product that well, I've had transition work on my own. Stick it in there.
Deferred capital outlay projects, it's like.
And there's nothing in writing, but I'm not really a man before, waiting for his stuff. Yeah, I don't, I feel, don't ask me why I shouldn't have to take it off, but since there's so much stuff I haven't, DJ, so I just go there and I'm just gonna, I need to get rid of it. So if there was, the light was on, but I didn't have to, like, well, reset. And I'm like, yeah, that's his time. What he does normally, it's 3 o'clock on Monday, which I know this is a special meeting, so that timeline doesn't work. He actually pushed out that 59%. But I mean, every minute.
Seriously.
I wouldn't get it. But. He should've said, I haven't been at my desk.
It's okay.
At least 20 seconds all the time more.
He's Arizona.
You're Arizona State.
I already did
Did
it.
it
Take that one.
No, but
Did you finish in 2 years?
my undergrad, four and a half.
Where did you go to grad school?
Arizona State for grad school.
The UA for under?
No, I applied there. But I went to Northern Colorado. You went to Northern Colorado too, though, so that's what we should.
Seriously? You guys both want hippie land?
No,
No,
just
that's
for,
university.
just for, one but still, I'm still a member, so.
And Northern Colorado is like a small, it's like a small
Say.
Found that out the other day.
Yeah,
So I can't knock them, only on something.
just on the grad final.
I'm almost in there.
Hang on, we got one going on, so we got camera up there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with a special meeting at 5 o'clock. It's 5:02. We're starting. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation?
Like, yeah, I'm good with that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the Air Force will do the invocation.
Our Father, thank you for giving us the privilege of living in this town. Would you give us wisdom tonight as we make decisions that affect this entire community. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you both. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Lucinovich,
Here.
Pierce,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stump,
Here.
Mayor McGuire.
Here. Workshop, proposed operating budget, fiscal year 2019-2020. Okay, Mr. Heath.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Again, for the record, Andy Heath, financial consultant to the city. What you have before you tonight is the actual final budget that's been prepared for consideration by the city council tonight. As you may recall, there was a preliminary budget workshop that was held on July 24th, a couple of months ago, where we brought back to the city council a very baseline preliminary budget, trying to create a lay of the land on exactly where some of the funds stood in the city, and to give the council an indication of what might be coming in the future. That preliminary budget, based on the information that we received from the workshop, was actually redone, and we brought back in a budget workshop, the preliminary budget, on September 16th, 2 weeks ago. And what you see before you tonight is indicative of some of the things that you again did discuss a couple of weeks ago, where we added those back to the budget, and more importantly, attempted to balance the budget, considering the council's request that whatever comes back before the council in terms of this budget be balanced. So staff believes we've done our best job at bringing back a budget that accomplishes that, and we'll be going through that tonight. Looking at this in this presentation, as we're giving this presentation, we're not going to rehash a lot of the slides and everything that you've seen before a couple of times. You won't see a lot of the staffing slides or anything like that. This is just going to focus on some of the changes that were made, and more importantly, the strategies that staff is recommending moving forward for the balance of this budget year, which is 9 months. Today is the close of the first quarter of the fiscal year. We've got 9 months left to do, as you will see, a lot of work to bring things into play. So discussion outline for tonight, we'll go over the updates to the budget and give you a citywide overview. We'll look specifically again at the general fund, keeping in mind that 2 weeks ago when you saw the budget, the general fund was about $500,000 out of balance. Okay, so we've tried to fix that and have put before you a balanced budget for the general fund. Public safety funds, a couple of changes there, just a couple of reminders for both the police and fire operations when we look at that slide. Enterprise funds, we'll look at that. And then other special revenue funds, there's one in particular that was impacted with this final budget. And then some of the citywide strategies, as I mentioned, that we'll be recommending that your city council consider for staff to move forward with in terms of direction provided. Looking at some of the changes that have been made to the budget since the workshop presentation 2 weeks ago. Again, we do have a balanced general fund budget. We have updates to the police and fire services funds based on approved reduction of the special assessment. So this is the special assessment reduction that was done a couple of months ago. So been a lot of moving parts in the police and fire funds with staffing, with capital, with a lot of other things. And we've actually been able to balance the budget consistent with the reduction of the tax to, I believe, $172, which was approved by the city council a couple of months ago. We have expansion of the deferred capital concept. 2 weeks ago, you saw that one of the things that we did, particularly in the general fund, was defer a component of the capital in the general fund, not all of it, but defer a component of it in that capital would have to come back to the city council before it was ultimately approved and appropriated as such. The budget does call out the capital that's needed and mention some of the things that staff has been thinking about for capital in the general fund, and then also capital in some of the enterprise and operating funds like streets. However, all the capital at this point in time is deferred. And what that means is it will have to come back to the city council consistent with the fiscal analysis to make sure that A, the city can afford the capital before it's purchased. And then more importantly, if there's a true need for this capital, and what might be able to give. In other words, if it can't be afforded, is there some sort of a trade-off that can occur in one of the other funds and or other funding within the fund itself, i.e. the general fund, that can give and actually support the purchase of that capital. All that will have to be done before any capital comes back and ultimately is appropriated. Again, we have the integration of the Tierra del Sol Enterprise Fund, which is no longer an enterprise fund because it's now a department in the general fund. So that is in here. And then we have some updates to the Streets Fund. The Streets Fund did not have some of the non-personal costs that were built into it in the last iteration of the budget. So I put those in there, and then I've also trued up the Housing Fund, consistent with what was approved by the Housing Corporation for their budget. This is that really busy slide, and the budget document, you'll probably be able to see it better. But the column to look at in this slide, again, is that second to the last column on the right, where it says excess deficit of revenues over expenditures. What we're looking for in that column is whether or not revenues exceed expenditures or vice versa. As you can see, for the general fund and all the special revenue funds mentioned, revenues do exceed expenditures. So we're defining this as a balanced budget. We have a budget that essentially does not use reserves and is not required to use reserves in any way, shape, or form. Keep in mind, though, that there is a certain amount of deferred capital that goes with the general fund and the police and fire funds, all three of those funds, that if you were to spend that money, that would take away from that surplus that you see in that second column to the right. So that's why we're recommending that as we go forward and as we prepare better financial reports for you on a monthly and a quarterly basis to help you better gauge the decisions that need to be made, you'll be able to see whether or not the city can actually afford this. And then more importantly, have staff do a presentation that indicates the need and the why behind anything that's capital related. When you go down to the enterprise funds, you'll see some deficits, some brackets there. Those are only due to the capital being built in. Again, just like any other capital in the city, anything that's in the capital for water, sewer, or airport, or even Dollar Ride for that matter, will have to come back to the council before it's appropriated. It's as simple as that. So those bracket numbers, if you took out the capital, they would all be positive. So in a sense, before you consider capital in the city's enterprise funds, you have a balanced budget, with the exception of the airport. The airport has a systemic deficit, and we'll talk about that a little bit at this point in time and kind of give you some strategies and some recommendations on what staff is thinking about moving forward with the airport. But there are a significant amount of moving parts at the airport, and a lot of thinking needs to be done before we actually take action on exactly what transpires out at the airport. And then you see the other special revenue funds, the Ashford Mall, the SDI fund, and the Housing Corporation all have positive balances as well. So essentially, this is the budget that's before you tonight. And what I'll do now is I'll go through some of the changes that have been built in to bring you to this budget tonight. This is just an update of the general fund slide.
Let's start changing. I don't know. No, it's in good.
All right, this is just an update of the general fund slide. And what this shows you is what the final budget is for the general fund in revenues and expenditures. And you can see we have about $61 difference there. $61. You're on. All right, let's try this again. As you can see, the general fund has about a $61 difference. Revenues do exceed expenditures, and we're calling this essentially a balanced budget. So if everything comes to fruition in the general fund, you recognize all the revenues that are anticipated to be received budgetarily that are built in, and likewise all the expenditures are incurred. You'll have $61 at the end of the day to put back into fund balance. So that's the way you can look at this. Again, revenues, your largest source of revenue in the general fund obviously is property tax, $2.2 million come in from that. And you have franchise fees and sales tax. And then on the expenditure side, there have been some changes that have been built in, and we'll go through what those changes are. But right now, the largest component of the general fund in terms of the department is Tierra del Sol, which is about 18% of the general fund budget at $810,000. And you'll see that's about $100,000 less than it was last time, 2 weeks ago, and we'll explain that. And then you have community development and planning and utilities, facilities, some of the other departments. But those departments that are listed there, in addition to the unfunded liability that you must pay on an annual basis, and it's just a fixed cost, it's not a choice whether or not you pay this, that $407,000. All of that combined is about 75% of the budget. So you can see the majority of the general fund budget is in these areas right here. Okay, what are some of the changes that were made to bring the general fund into balance? One of the things we looked at was, as I mentioned before, we only deferred a portion of the capital out of the general fund that had to do specifically with the Parks Department and also with the Data Processing Department. What we've done here is we've actually gone in and looked at deferring all of the capital in the general fund, so that anything that needs to be done from a capital or an outlay perspective needs to come back to the council, consistent with the funding plan and consistent with a need. So that's a savings of another $90,750. Another area we looked at was there's a vacant administrative assistant position in the administration department, which is the city manager's office. By freezing that administrative assistant position, it frees up on the general fund basis, keeping in mind that a portion of this position applies to other funds as well, but the general fund component of this is $35,810. So that becomes a savings. We eliminated the Part 3 budget. There was a very small Part 3 budget that we just put over into the TDS and Parks budget to be absorbed by that budget. So that saved just a small amount, $14,111. We also established a fund-wide vacancy savings factor in the general fund, pending a review of salary allocation factors. And 2 weeks ago, we did talk about the fact that there are several departments in the city, particularly the administrative-related departments like city manager's office, the finance department, and human resources, that actually transfer a component of their cost, rightfully so, to other funds in the city, predominantly the enterprise funds. And in some of the other operating funds on an ongoing basis. One thing we really need to look at to determine whether or not we're missing anything, and more importantly, to make sure that we're doing this right in terms of the way we're operating today, is look at those salary allocation factors and assure that we are transferring the appropriate amount of money to those funds as we should be. We're estimating that when you look at the vacancy savings factor and combine that with the salary allocation factors, once we go through and do that study, which won't take that long, that we can save about $50,000 to the general fund now. We also have, we have established a salary allocation to the off-highway vehicle OHV permit program for administrative support costs. Right now, the OHV permit program, which is an ongoing program, it's not the grant program, it's your actual receipt of the permits as offset by the expenditures that are incurred for that program. Receives support administratively, just like any other fund in the city would. And there are no administrative costs that are transferred to that fund, nor have they been. So we're recommending a transfer of $20,000 for, again, the city manager, finance, and human resources staff to be transferred to that fund. We're reducing the Tierra del Sol, the TDS overall budget, pending a review of that budget in its entirety. So we're talking about looking at the staff, we're talking about looking at how water is used, and we're talking about looking at all the operational expenditures that make up the entire TDS operation. And when we look at that, given that the TDS budget, as I mentioned on the slide a couple slides ago, is 18% of the general fund budget, we can probably find a savings of about $100,000 there somewhere. So we will look for that. And these are all built in as credits to these departments. Okay, so now explain how we're going to monitor that once I'm done with the general fund. Reduce finance and human resources total budget, so taking the combined budget for finance and human resources and combining those two departments into an administrative services department like many cities the size of California City have, where instead of having two directors, a finance director and human resources director, you have one director, an administrative services director that oversees both of those operations. with competent mid-management staff to lead both the human resources and the accounting functions. That can save $50,000 by doing that. Reduce general fund legal services appropriation. We need to review the costs for all legal services and determine how those costs are, again, similar to salary costs, partitioned off to other funds where those funds benefit from the legal costs themselves. You pay a legal retainer every month. That legal retainer is a citywide retainer, and we need to look at whether or not that retainer is being costed out to all funds in the city, or all operating funds in the city, including the enterprise funds. And then more importantly, looking at how legal is being used in the city to potentially reduce that cost. We figure we can save about $70,000 in the general fund there.
Can I briefly comment?
Absolutely.
One thing I'm not sure if it's been done, and I know I bill it separately, would be say like when we're doing work for an enterprise fund like water or sewer or airport, we're trying to bill that separately. And I'm not sure, I think I've asked a couple times, is that actually being drawn out to those funds? And I've heard that maybe it isn't, you know, and so that would be one thing that I would encourage the city to do.
I mean, this is what we're seeing as we go through this. And some of these things that are really mentioned here as part of these 3 or 4 slides, we need some time to go through this. We want to do this right. We want to put it together correctly, and we want to make sure that what we bring back to you is exactly what needs to be done from an accounting perspective.
Yeah, Christian, what we did before, when Andy first did a budget for us a while ago, I went through there and there were some things that weren't given the same percentages, and he made sure that that happened. So he's doing that. At least last time him and I talked, he was doing it.
Right.
And we still need some significant review of things like that in the city, for sure. Reduce overall water costs to the general fund. So the general fund pays for water from a variety of different departments, the largest, of course, being TDS. You also have fleet, and then the facilities there, that should actually say utilities, not facilities. Utilities. And about $960,000 water costs in the general fund. Okay, so we figured that by looking at the water rates, and this is with the larger strategy of actually going out and doing a water study, understanding what the rate should be consistent with the capital plan for the water needs that's put together for expansion of your water program, and then more importantly, making sure you remain in compliance with your water permit. So looking at all that, we figure we can save about $50,000 once we get through that water study. Reduce planning, building appropriations, subject to review of staffing, contractual services, and engineering costs. A lot of moving parts in the planning and building budget. And in looking at the history of the planning and building budget, some of the things that are being done, how engineering costs are being costed out to the various departments, contractual services being used, the cannabis program, we figure we might be able to save $65,000 there as well, especially given the staffing that is in the planning and building department. Distribute a portion of the general fund audit fees from the finance department to other funds. Right now, it looks as though the audit for the city is charged to the general fund, and really that no other funds receive a portion of that bill. When you undertake an audit, you're auditing citywide funds, and rightfully so. And there are various methodologies you can use that I've seen to put those costs out to the other funds. So we figure about a savings of $22,500 there. And then you can see we're also adding an appropriation for the general fund portion of the forensic audit. That was discussed a couple of weeks ago. We've actually put that in there. Costed that out about $80,000, I believe, citywide. So the general fund portion of that, based on a formula we came up with, is about $20,000. Okay, so before I actually go through this slide, we just went through probably 12 or 15 different things that we're looking at in areas that we would like to go back and really look at thoroughly to make sure that things are being costed correctly that the appropriate share of costs are going to the correct fund, and then that perhaps we are managing things from an operational perspective the way they need to be managed from a fiscally prudent basis. These things are going to take some time. We do feel that, and when we get to the last couple of slides, you'll see again what these strategies are. But it's going to take the next 9 months of this fiscal year to really go through these in earnest and have these elements of this strategy to approach to this budget make a difference in the budget. And it will make a difference once you start going through this and once you start really understanding how things are managed, how costs are apportioned to the various funds from a staff perspective, from an operational perspective, from a water study, all these things. But we really need to get into this and understand exactly what it is before we just start making certain assumptions in a budget and hope that they come true, okay? Part of this whole approach will be to make sure that your council has as good of information as it can get, okay? And that's gonna be better information than you're getting now, okay? You're getting a monthly report right now. But the goal is to give you a monthly report that actually demonstrates how we're doing on some of the things that we're talking about as part of these budget workshop discussions. How we're getting to that end, what we're doing, what the changes have been, you know, what the savings have been. We will begin to give you a context to some of the fiscal things that you're looking at in some of these reports, where right now it's just a bunch of numbers. And with that context, with that fiscal context, give you an operational context as well on some of the things that might be transpiring. So that is staff's goal, and it is, staff is dedicated to making sure that you build that. So when you look at the general fund and you forecast out, again, you know that you do have a multi-year forecast. It's built as a base forecast for the general fund and then also for your public safety funds. But looking at the general fund specifically, you can see that in 1920 you have that balanced budget of about $61. And assuming you kept this base budget and the things that are built in to this budget to make it balanced, consistent throughout the following fiscal years, given certain assumptions for growth in revenue and growth in expenditures, you can see that we still have work to do, okay? In 2021, there's $223,000 deficit that's projected at the base level. And again, this is just at the base level. No other decisions have been made. It assumes that we continue to do things the way they're being presented tonight with the changes that you're seeing. So it looks like expenditures are growing a little bit more than revenues in this case, as forecasted, okay? Now we will go back and work on this forecast throughout the year as well. The goal is to bring this back to the council on a quarterly basis. It takes a lot of work to go into this forecast, a lot of staff updates, but things always change, and this forecast will change also. But we will bring it back on a quarterly basis. The goal is, you know, right after this meeting is the end of your quarter. We're going to go back and start updating this stuff again and pull payroll records down and see exactly where we're at, update the numbers on an actual basis, and find out exactly what we need to do to move forward, to make sure that we're meeting what we're recommending to you today. And then in the future, you can see it's about a $200,000 issue for a couple of years, and then it drops a little bit in 23, 24, and 24, 25, and that's because your PERS unfunded liability costs drop a little bit at that time as well. Okay, going into the police and fire operations funds. From what you saw last time, 2 weeks ago, these funds are virtually unchanged. Okay, these were somewhat balanced funds when you take into account the deferred capital, of course. Once you throw all that capital back into these budgets, however, you have an issue with the police fund where it's not balanced. The fire fund becomes very close to being balanced because it has a $300,000 surplus right now. But the only changes that have been made to the police and fire operations funds is the addition of the forensic audit. So because the fire operations fund had a surplus, we just took it out of that surplus, and then to keep the police fund balanced for its share of the forensic audit costs, we reduced overtime accordingly. One thing I did want to mention about the police and fire operations funds is this is kind of one of the strategies that you'll see again on one of the last slides. is there needs to be a review of the overall public safety operations required to reduce reliance on the special assessment itself, and create a reserve as a means to mitigate impacts on service levels upon the sunset or the reduction of the assessment by 24-25. So it is a goal of the city to try to reduce the assessment, and as such, we need to really continue to look at how the operations of the police and fire departments vis-a-vis every other operation in the city that is funded by the general fund, which is where police and fire would be funded if you didn't have the special assessment, fits in. So we will be beginning to think about that and exactly how these operations look moving forward, given the council's desire to reduce special assessment further. Police and fire operations funds again, just to reiterate, all capital and outlay remains deferred. In the police department, this was just for some leases on some vehicles, new vehicles that is. And then the fire department has some capital in there for the Zoll monitors, for a vehicle, and also for a potential payback of the police fire station remodel to the general fund of $100,000. Now, even with this deferred capital, you might recall that the fire fund has about a $350,000 surplus right now. So to the extent you wanted to take a portion of that surplus, you could apply it all to the $1 million negative fund balance that is in the fire department right now, which is what is owed back to the general fund, and reduce that substantially. You could take a portion of it and buy the Zoll monitors if that was the desire. Do a lot of different things. Nonetheless, this deferred capital can likely be used and still remain in a balanced budget format for the fire department. One other thing I wanted to mention for the police department is there is a vacancy savings built in for $781,000. Okay, that was the only way to get the police department, and we talked about this before. That was the only way to get the police department to a balanced budget. Was actually take virtually all their vacant positions that are funded, not the unfunded ones, but funded vacant positions, and create a credit in the budget, assuming that those will be kept vacant for the duration of the year. Okay. Talking with the police chief today, there are a couple more vacancies that were anticipated when this is all put together. So it looks like, at least right now, before looking at any hard numbers for the first quarter, we're on track to achieve that. But there is a huge amount of vacancy savings built into the police department's budget. Okay, looking at the citywide enterprise fund, so water, sewer, airport, and dial-a-ride. Let's get to that slide real quick. Okay, so recommended budgets are essentially unchanged. Again, a portion of the forensic audit is added to the appropriate funds, rightfully so. And then salary transfers have been reduced for the recommended defunding of positions. So one of the positions that we're recommending be defunded is the administrative assistant in the city manager's office. And again, that had a portion of its costs apportioned to other funds in the city. So all the funds have been adjusted for that. So not too many changes in the water and sewer fund. With the airport fund, really no changes at all have been made there. And that's because we do need to have a comprehensive review of airport operations, as I mentioned, to reduce their systemic deficit. They have an operating deficit of about $155,000. So when you look at the ongoing revenue sources and the ongoing expenditures, they're just spending on an ongoing basis about $150,000 more on an annual basis than they're bringing in. So a few things need to be looked at. And this is going to require some time. We need to explore ways to increase revenue, whether that means looking at the lease revenues at the airport, whether it means looking at the fuel farm as an added source of revenue, whether it means looking at other leases. There's just things that need to be reviewed. We need to look into using an FBO, which means fixed-based operator, which is someone to actually manage the airport and the operations at the airport from a profit-making perspective, where you have somebody come in and actually that is the business they do. They will come in and do the work. They'll take a component of the fuel, pay the city a minor amount for the fuel, but they will run the fuel farm so that we don't need staff to be able to do that ourselves and actually spend money on that staff. And then we need to look at the ability to, again, use staff at the airport in other areas of the city. Can other areas of the city, for some of the things that maybe the staff at the airport is qualified to do, benefit from receiving the services from those individuals that are currently at the airport, so that a portion of those costs can go to those other funds. So all of those things need to be looked at in terms of the airport.
Just one quick question, sir.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at the airport wise as possibly farming out? Is that what I'm,
It's an option we're looking at.
okay.
Yes, the FBO, yes.
Another area in the enterprise funds is we recommend a comprehensive review of the water rates and a rate study for the water program. That goes without saying. That's been a common theme in the workshops that we presented to date. So that is part of our strategy moving forward. Ultimately, to the extent water rates were reduced, that would have a dramatic impact on the city and especially the general fund. When you look at how much the city pays for water from the general fund, looking at that, and if the rate study came out in favor of reducing the rate, that would have a huge impact on the budget moving forward in a very positive way. Capital and outlay in all enterprise funds, again, requires a needs-based analysis and council approval before undertaking. So before it comes back, it's got to go through all the hurdles that it needs to go through before funding is actually provided. Citywide special revenue funds, some of the recommended budgets have changed because, again, portion of the forensic audit is added to them. We have the salary transfers for the OHV permit fund that I did mention. The streets fund has been updated with some anticipated non-personal costs. It just was missed in the prior budget. And the housing fund has been updated based on the budget that was adopted by the Housing Corporation. One other area for special revenue funds is your SDI, your Subdivision Deferred Improvement Fund. And we're recommending a comprehensive review of that fund to determine exactly how funds might be utilized that are in that fund to benefit the city and some of the things the city is doing and actually act as a source of revenue to some other funds to the extent it was legally permissible. Okay, so now we get into the citywide strategies. So when you take all of these things and all of the recommendations that we've just put before you to balance this year's budget as defined, there's a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that we're able to achieve that balanced budget moving forward. So here are some fiscal and operational strategies that we're looking at citywide. Some of this we've already talked about, but I'll just mention them all together here. Again, review water rates and conduct the water rate study. We need to review citywide staffing levels and citywide staffing allocation transfers. So this isn't just looking at what's being allocated to other funds. This is actually looking at the city's staffing in general. In all departments, and really looking at what does it take to provide the level of service that's desired in the city from a staffing perspective. That needs to be done. We need to review the special assessment tax vis-a-vis citywide operations, with the understanding that right now the special assessment tax funds your police and fire operation. And to the extent the special assessment tax is A, reduced, or B, is weaned off, or C, actually goes away in fiscal 24-25 when it sunsets. Citywide operations are going to play a big impact in this because you can't just eliminate police and fire. They have to be absorbed into your citywide operation. So what does the entire citywide operation look like in terms of the special assessment tax and what's going to go on with that over the next several years? We need to review cannabis taxes, collections processes, and make sure that we're collecting the funds that are rightfully due to the city for the taxes and the permits that are out there. Review overall cost and revenue schema for the city's parks facilities. So right now the city, again in the general fund, your Tierra del Sol alone was 18% of your general fund budget. That didn't even include the park component of the budget. So it's probably close to 30% of the general fund budget is being spent on parks. So we need to look at the overall cost and the revenue schema for the city's parks programs and the facilities, and exactly what that looks like moving forward. Update and develop immediate and long-term capital planning, and that goes without saying. To understand exactly what your long-term capital needs are, particularly in the enterprise funds, because it does have the funding to support some of those capital projects. And then what is the general fund going to need to fund as well moving forward? Review the ability to utilize your SDI funding towards applicable expenditures, mentioned that. Review and update citywide policies and procedures, and update them and then create a manual so that all of your policies and procedures and the how-to behind some of the things that we're recommending tonight in terms of funding transfers, operational expectations, etc. It's all documented somewhere, and it's available on a go-to basis for anybody that comes in, new staff or otherwise. Conduct a forensic audit of the city's financial activity. That is one of the priorities of the council. Continue to update the long-term financial forecast for core operational funds. So I mentioned that before. We have it for the general fund, police services, and the fire services fund. You need to see that. You need to see that every quarter for a while, so that you can understand exactly what's going on in this town and how things are moving around. This data will be real time, and we'll make it as real time as quickly as possible after the close of a quarter, so that you can make better decisions and understand exactly how maybe this framework from a budget perspective is coming together for this year. And then update monthly financial reporting to your council to provide context for fiscal and operational activity. That's critical. You need to get more than just the financial report that has numbers on it. You need the background behind that. What's going on? What's not going on? What are the cyclical things that are going on in the budget or actual activity that you need to be aware of, so that you understand exactly what's going to transpire or maybe what's not going to transpire. So we will put something like that together for you in the future. So I'm going to stop there. Again, the purpose of tonight was just to go through some of the changes that were made to make this a balanced budget, but more importantly, vastly more importantly, give you an idea of exactly what staff is thinking of in terms of how we want to proceed and what we're recommending to your council and moving forward to really keep this budget in sync, online, and in line. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
How can we review something that has absolutely nothing in it? How do you expect me to establish a policy? Let's go back. Review overall cost and revenue schema for the city's park facilities. We have not one number in front of us for that purpose tonight. I've been asking for how many months for just year to date on water usage. I haven't gotten that yet. How do we just, with this one item, review overall cost and revenue schema for the city's parks and facilities when we haven't gotten a single thing to do that with? You're asking us to approve a budget without anything in it. Because you're saying that everything's going to happen in the future. I mean, this is our first and only opportunity to actually use numbers. We don't even have year-to-date numbers for this year. We're late. Why do we not have year-to-date expenditures? I want to know how much we paid the attorney this year to say that we can really legitimately reduce his budget by 20%. But we don't have those numbers, and you want me to make a decision on that? I don't know how to do that.
The information that's in your budget document for fiscal 18-19 takes into account what we anticipate the accrued expenditures to be for fiscal 18-19. So I've added those back in. So what you're seeing there, and until we actually close the books for 18-19, which will be soon, And keep in mind, we just closed the books for fiscal 17-18, and the auditors just received all of their final information, so that they can actually begin to do their field work. This is this is all the moving parts that actually come into this budget. That's why it's difficult to put anything before you that is gonna give you fiscal context without telling you, at least from a base perspective, which is what we tried to do on 3 different occasions, this is what the fund is likely gonna look like, okay? But as we get into this, and as we actually undertake some of the things that we're looking at, we have a pretty good general idea of the way things are gonna go, but things also need to be done. The parks costs are in there. The parks costs that for 18-19, as adjusted, are in each of the line items in both the Parks and Recreation budget and in the TDS budget. And, I mean, all the information's there, but yes, you are right. There is no context to this right now. This is what we're saying we need to bring back to you throughout the course of this year, so that there's so many of these items that need to be contextualized and brought back before you.
So then, what you're saying to us is that we're just gonna buy into a concept and approve it, ability to go forward and be happy with that?
It's a balanced budget. And there's, like I said, there are a lot of things that need to transpire.
I mean, isn't that the purpose of a budget, is to actually engage in that discussion? Isn't that what, you're supposed to be presenting us that information so that we can actually make that, or have that discussion up here? Or have that discussion up here with our staff? But you've given us absolute, I don't know, I just wanted to have, I've been asking for going on 10 weeks. I've been asking just to know what our cost for all the parks operations is. I want to know how much water is for all water usage in the city. I've asked that at least 3 times in council meetings, and then you're saying, well, we'll review it sometime in the future, and then you'll be either happy with your decision or not. I can't make a decision based on that. Now, I received in the last staff report, water rates, or water usage for 1 month, and if I don't even know how to put that in reference to what we need to do to make the budget look right, how to direct staff after the fact. But again, you're asking me to say, okay, well, we won't talk about that, or we'll have this conversation in the future. But our council meetings will get pretty long if we have to come back to these things on a bi-weekly basis.
Somebody respond, I don't care.
So you need more detail. I feel like what's built in these numbers are those numbers that we've been given. You wanna see the detailed numbers. And I thought you got the water reports, by the way.
I have in front of me, 1 month. And it's just, I would like to be able to know that we have a plan and a direction on how to reduce our utilization of water, and that's gonna be half the step to controlling Parks and Rec. But even in Parks and Rec, you X'd out the line for the par 3. Well, it still exists, and it's still not being cared for, and it's still an eyesore, or it's an increasing eyesore for the community. Well, at some point, how are we gonna talk about it 6 months after the budget's approved, when it's been eliminated from the budget altogether anyway? I mean, I just don't understand the thought process that leads us to feeling comfortable with what I've got here. I understand what you've done, I understand the budget being balanced, I'm just saying that now's the time for us to actually have looks at things and compare 18-19 against what you think 19-20 is gonna do, but I even need to have numbers for 19, what you've already spent this year. Just to feel comfortable that says, okay, we're good, this is an appropriate, attack on our issues here. I'm just not, I'm just saying, I'm just saying that, why do I not know how much the attorney has charged for the first 3 months? And if I know how much he charged for 3 months, is it even reasonable to start to think about what, 335,000, will that work? What if I say I don't think that's gonna work? It hasn't worked, the last 3 years. So I mean, I don't know I don't even know how you expect us to review this.
So we need to do the comprehensive studies prior to presenting the
What,
budget.
what,
You need to
what
see
you're
each
gonna,
one. Yeah.
you've got here.
Those details are built in these numbers, they're just not, the details are not before you.
What I would say is that, this is a straw man, and we're not gonna have everything exactly. So what I think that they have given us is a straw man to look and see. We're gonna have a mid-year review. So at the mid-year review, you can, a quarterly, but I
Quarter
mean,
review is next Tuesday.
understand, but we're just getting the budget done now, so, I mean, if we want to expend more money and get more people working in there, so we can have our exact, what the quarter is now, if we can also, we just finished up our, audit, got the last paperwork to the auditors today. So if you wanna do all of those things with the staffing that we have, I mean, I understand your frustration, but also I'm looking at reality, and we have a very small department, and they're doing what they can to give us a straw man, you know, for a budget. They're not gonna have everything done exactly.
And these aren't phantom numbers, these numbers are built with every bit of the detail that you're asking for, so you want to see that detail, how we built these numbers, but these numbers aren't imagined numbers.
Well, the one thing that he did bring up, that Dr. Sinovich brought up, that I also have a concern, the part 3, all that funding is being moved into TDS.
There is no funding.
Well, there was 14,000
There
and
was
some change.
14,000 in funding, in the Par 3 budget, and I can't recall what it was for,
That is, I don't even think,
What was that?
If I remember right, it was salaries.
I think that's what that was for, was salaries, because,
part-time salaries, so that has been absorbed over into the TDS budget, yes.
because the concern I have is I definitely want to see that part 3 get back up and running.
But that's not gonna happen with this
It-
budget?
Well, no, we don't have the money. We have what we have, but what about this is the first time a budget like this has ever been brought before council in the history of this city. It has never been this detailed. And it's,
Mayor, having said that, what detail, do you guys need to trust these numbers?
It's not that we don't trust the numbers, we just,
comparisons.
I'm saying my first thought is the attorney. I see how that went down, but the very first number that's gonna tell me that works is just to see what we spent year to date on him. I mean, that's just a confidence builder that we can actually live with that particular number. And I personally think it's gonna be bigger. So that already I'm gonna knock your budget out of balance just on adding to the attorney cost, because it's going to be.
I think about 2 months ago, you had asked for a year-to-date, and I gave you a 12-month, the last 12 months.
the actual numbers of what I've broken down.
I didn't get that, but that's all right.
Oh.
I know, that didn't come to me.
I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's just, oh yeah, I'm always wrong. I think it's just the comparisons, and and I think it's more dealing with us. So when we decide on the budget, did we make the right decision? Yes, we did, and part of that was based on the befores and afters. And I think that's
always
been that
It's
way.
always been the process.
And it's been the process for 50+ years in this city. And so things are slowly changing, hopefully for the better. But since we're transitioning into a new budget world, if you will, if we still have a little bit of the old there to help us with the transition, does that make sense?
Well, just a little thing, in the airport fund, the city has in the past, it was budgeted in last year's budget, received $50,000 a year from Mojave. Well, we didn't receive it 2 years ago, and we didn't receive it last year, and it's not in this year's budget. As much as not, we have 3 people up there that have never done this before and aren't aware that that's been a traditional source of revenue to the airport.
They usually pay for the.
Well, I mean, it's just,
It's not operating revenue, it's for a project. They pay that money directly to the roof, or that check directly goes to the, contractor. For Mojave, yeah, I spoke.
It doesn't have to be a project from what I
Yes, it does.
understood.
Dave Evans, I spoke to him. It has to be, we present the project to them with the invoice from the approved vendor or contractor.
When was the last time you talked with them?
A couple months ago when I spoke with, Dave Evans.
Dave Evans.
Yeah.
Dave Evans said.
They do not write a direct check to
To me,
us.
the reason they have not given us those monies for the last couple of years was their fear that it was just gonna be put into the general fund. They wanted it specifically for airport projects.
Projects only?
Yes.
I thought it was a reimbursement even for personnel.
Mm-mm. I'll check.
That's, yeah, again,
Again, well, that's my point though, is that
it's not here.
it's not even here. So that's just a small revenue thing that's not there, and there's a few others that are like that. There's questions I have that don't make sense to me. Cannabis permits, are those annual?
Yes.
Where's that money go?
Where does it go?
Where does it
General
go?
fund. General fund.
Well, wait, I thought cannabis went to public safety.
Okay, so taxes.
The taxes, any money dealing with cannabis goes to the general fund. However, the thing, especially with the taxes, police and fire have first crack at it. If that makes sense.
So, I mean, but we're talking $330,000. Is that not automatically supposed to go to public safety?
No.
It covers, engineers, it covers administration, it covers staff
Covers
time.
Planning, it
Planning.
covers that. The only money that's supposed to go to PD and fire are the taxes. From
So
cannabis.
the permits for each year then goes to how are we allocating those permit monies then?
So let me say
Different
something
departments.
on the cannabis tax
So it's just, okay.
or police and fire. What we haven't seen in this budget that needs, the voters voted on this was 90% of the increase in property tax, sales tax, and use tax, and cannabis tax are required to be allocated to police and fire. This isn't in the budget yet.
90%.
For property
No.
tax?
90% of the increase. Look at
You're talking
your,
about the formula.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
so there was when the parcel tax was brought forward, when the monies come in, they're supposed to be divided 50% to fire, 50% to police.
right.
But what it says is that every year there's gonna be a calculation done when you go to set what the rate is for the next year, and we have to reduce the amount, that's being allocated by, again, that's where that 90% number comes in.
90%
Of
of the
what was raised in
increase
property tax,
for
marijuana
the
tax, and sales tax. So you take all those together and there's a formula, but in a sense, you have to, if the marijuana and sales tax and property tax are going up, there's gonna be a reduction to the parcel tax. But it's not, it has nothing to do with how those proceeds are used.
It said, you know, in the ballot, it said that 90% of the increase of the property tax, sales tax, use tax, and cannabis tax are required to be allocated to police and fire. That's the increase every year to decrease Measure C, okay?
Right. Any increases in those would decrease the parcel tax.
Correct. And so there's no revenue line items for police and fire to receive the increase in these taxes. I just went through the first 5 pages, and I have some things, but I'll let.
Right, it's
Councilman
common to
Lozano
have the
continue.
property tax and the sales tax, that's going to the general fund, and marijuana tax as well.
Yeah, but I think when he was saying the 90% of the increase, just of that increase of that year,
Increase for the year,
that year.
is what we put in the, ballot measure that they
Again,
voted on.
the only thing in the ballot was that you would reduce the parcel tax by increases in those other 3 taxes. So that, the idea was that you gradually replace the parcel tax
Yes.
as those other ones go up. But those other ones have gone into the general fund and they will continue to do so based on.
And
That's
yet
how they
90% of the increases have to go to police and fire, not to the general fund.
But initially has to go to the general fund and
I'm not aware of that.
then gets allocated out.
I can take a
Which
look
would
at
be
that later.
appropriate to, as the
As
police
that-
and fire being
now
brought back into
now
the general
putting
fund.
police and fire
All right,
back in general fund.
okay, I'm good with that.
Question, when is the plan to put police and fire to start working them back into general fund? When will we start doing that?
Doing it now.
In the next fiscal year. In the next fiscal year, yeah, immediately for the 5-year plan. We have to.
Oh, there's more, but go ahead.
Okay. So I did an analysis on, just the first 5 pages. If we go to, and the pages aren't numbered, so I numbered them, reconciliation of staff cost allocations to the general fund. I've got it listed as page 2, it's one of the very first pages. We have an issue here with water and sewer, and 218, you're allocating, for example, for administration, you've got, water, $63,758, which goes to the city manager, and then sewer, $12,574. 218 specifically says cost of goods and services, so we can't just estimate or give a number, we have to have actual time spent that the city manager spent on that to move those monies out. Finance the same way, you know, you're pulling water and sewer stuff, and, to me, I don't see how you come up with these numbers when every year our numbers are gonna change. And this year, you know, so, the big one, Public Works Administration, you're gonna give them $169,837 out of the Water Enterprise Fund, for what? You know, they don't handle, in other words, they have to directly handle a portion of the water services before we can
Joe
get
does that.
for the city manager, and I complained about this last year with, our old city manager. He just says, I take 1/3 of my salary out of the water fund. Well, you can't do that, you know, it's, so we, you know, we need to look at that, very closely and make sure that it is actual.
Councilmember, that is one of our recommendations. percentages are just based on prior year percentages. Same spreadsheet that was used in prior years is used.
Right,
with these
which
two.
was, you know,
But we are recommending that we come back to you with a thorough analysis of exactly what it is. I mean, each position that is impacted or that impacts the water, sewer, or any fund that's listed in this matrix needs to be looked at to determine exactly how much of that position maybe preliminarily can be budgeted so that we can set up a budget, but more importantly, maybe we do need to track time, and have a component of the timesheet dedicated to the city manager or whoever actually putting how much time is spent on the waterfront.
because there's, you know, there's lawsuit after lawsuit that has been brought against these cities, and they've lost because of this, just arbitrarily taking monies out of the enterprise funds without calculating, without showing the hours dedicated, to those particular funds. We go to the next one, appropriated capital outlay projects. Water fund, you've got, well, first of all, the bottom 100 acres water line, there's no way we can allocate $4 million right now to that line without a rate study, water rate study and a master plan.
And we understand that, that's just,
So, you know, that shouldn't even
proposed
be in
project.
there right now.
Well, it's a project, that's all it is.
Okay, but you know, remember, capital improvement projects have to come to council with a plan, monies and everything, so we're looking, let's.
But
drop down
that's
$6 million.
That's not even gonna come up until we do the water rate study plan plus change, the general plan,
The master plan.
master plan, thank you.
But you're, so, you know, historically, we've been doing $600,000 a year in capital improvement projects. We've been taking, we've been pulling personnel off of those projects to do other things in the city. And, you know, I wasn't on the council then, but the council approved to hire personnel to strictly do these capital improvement projects, so that we could do the 5.5 miles, which the rate study said we were supposed to do, which is outdated. But for us to say we're gonna do $6 million, or actually $2 million this year, is not feasible. You know, it just, we need to look at it on the perspective that we've only done 600,000 in the past year. So all of these in here, they look good, but there's no, and if we approve these monies for these funds, then we have to do them.
correct,
But we can't do this many in 1 year.
fine, if we hire the,
No, historically, I'm saying.
historically, I agree, but hiring the right crews and the right, or contracting it out, but the money we should, 600 wasn't enough to spend in the past, we should have been doing more.
Absolutely.
And so we're excited about it, and we're projecting the fact that if we get the right people
But
in
see, if
place,
the
we'll get this
council
done.
approves this, the way you're stating it, then it has to be done.
It's going to
It's not gonna be done in a year.
be, it doesn't
Why?
have to be.
It
Yeah.
does have to be done. If we
Councilman
approve it
Paris.
This year's city budget, it has to be done this year. 218 will kill us on this.
Well, can't do anything until we get the new water rate study.
Right, so all I'm saying is that, you know, we need to,
We can do improvements all day long.
Yes.
So there's no reason not to press forward with it, it's just a question of
how much.
what can
Take
we
your
realistically,
priorities.
what we can we realistically ask our water department to do.
And again, it could be contracted out, so if our water department can only do 500,000, then we will contract out 1.5 million. So we can do that, that's.
Easily we can't, well, it's not easy, but, okay, so let's drop down to sewer fund, the tertiary filter. We've got
Can I
1.1
jump in real quickly? Just real quickly, because before you go on to that one. As I understand it, we have the money already, which has already been collected.
Right.
And so it needs to be expended for proper water purposes, in this case, replacing lines. So I guess what they're saying is we've got the money, they wanna contract it and get it built, whether it's by city staff or by outside contractors. it's not really a 218 question. The 218 question comes in when you're setting the rates and looking at the projects that are gonna be done, the cost of running the system, cost of getting the water, all of that. You do a proper analysis of all the costs of operating that system, including the administration portions of it, and you set a rate that's actually reflective of what the costs are. So now that the rates have been set and money has been collected, it needs to be spent for the purposes for which it was collected, which in this case would be building the water lines, which that's an important part of what needs to occur. So I don't wanna mix the two issues when we're talking about 218 has to do with how you set those rates. There's a public hearing process, there's an analysis. You cannot set rates beyond what you're actually spending.
That's what we did.
Based on the fee study. Now, we've done that, and I know there's been some criticism of that prior water study, and I think there was a recommendation to do a new one, but we do already have money in hand for these purposes, and that's, so that, I don't want you to mix those two, that the money's there to fix these lines, we should do that. That's actually we can't just hold on to them, we're not
No,
supposed to.
absolutely not, it has to be spent, and that's what everybody, I think, up here is screaming about, is let's get it done.
Yeah, and I think that's what
But don't
Anna
do
was
it. Yeah,
No,
what
I'm
I'm
not saying
hearing,
don't do it, I say be realistic, you know, if you feel that you can do this many projects this year, you know, they've never done it in 5 years. You know, so.
We haven't done a lot of things in 5 years,
yeah,
we haven't
it's
done,
rates there
this
for
city,
5 years.
this city has taken a new turn, if you will, and we're heading down a new road, and what has occurred in the past is status quo is gone. Everybody is trying to make sure that what we say we're going to do, we are going to do. That's the whole purpose of this. We're gonna sit there, and if that means we gotta farm it out, so be it, we'll farm it out.
So we've got 9 months.
We can make a lot of magic happen in 9 months. Just saying.
And I'm saying, you know,
Okay,
we know
I like
we either
it.
have to spend this money or give it back to the ratepayers. And I agree, we need to spend it, but we also need to be realistic if we've got a plan. So again, you know, we've gotta have a plan to do this, not just say, this is what we're gonna do. We have to have the rate study, the master plan, all done,
And that's what's gonna occur after this.
but very quickly, I hope.
Yeah.
Immediately.
The part of the city that, Councilman Paris, the part of the city that I live in, I see those guys out there replacing pipe every day. They're constantly doing it, and it's.
Sure, I understand that, but we're also pulling them off to do other things. And
well, there's a hiring freeze,
Well,
so, in the enterprise fund, we could have hired people,
absolutely.
but we didn't. So we're spread thin,
You know,
you
again.
guys want a lot of projects done, but, you don't wanna give us a tool to do it sometimes.
Okay.
We're asking for that, the money's in there.
You know, I've always been the proponent, if you need an employee, all you have to do is come to us and we'll make it happen. Other councilmen may not feel that way, but, I've always felt that when you needed somebody, all you had to do is come to council and we would make it happen. And so I'm saying that again, you know, even though we have this budget freeze, we need to get past that in certain areas and get some things done. Your, filter, you got 1,170,000 for this Tetrary filter, and yet I think it was the 2004 rate study said it was only gonna cost $300,000. So did we look back historically on that, or how did we come up with the 1.1 million figure?
I'll need to come back with an answer on
Yeah,
that.
no, I understand that, but these are just things that I've looked at, that I had, questions on, you know, so it's, again, we all have.
On that kind of an issue where when they did the rate study, they underestimated what something was gonna cost, that's not a violation of 218, that's
No,
merely,
I'm not saying that's a violation at all, I'm
it's
just
a
saying
bad study.
that
and-
we were, you know, told in the past that there was only needed 300,000, and then we see the figure 1.7 or 1.1
So,
million.
so what that would indicate to me is that when they go back to do the study again, they may have to actually account for more money to offset for what it actually costs. So it was just, again, they do their best to try and estimate what the costs are gonna be going forward, and a reasonable reserve for that enterprise fund as well. And then it is what it is until you do another study. And you should do the study every once in a while just to make sure you're sticking close to what the actual costs are. So sometimes you're gonna have to up the rate, sometimes, you know, presumably if you overcharge, then you need to bring it down.
Yeah, well, it was just the actuals there, so the one that I've been really, for the last 2.5 years, been talking about, saying we need, we have no expense line for the property records audit. If we audit those records and take one employee to audit those records, there's millions in there to be recovered. Easily millions of dollars. And for 2.5 years, we haven't hired one person to go through our property records, because every time we look at them, the city has sold property to individuals 2.5 years, 3 years ago, and they're still not on the records, there's nothing there for them
That's
to even
county's
pay
fault.
property tax. What?
That's the county's
No,
fault.
it's not, it's our fault for not giving it to the county. If we don't, as a city, say, we sold this property to so-and-so, you need to start collecting taxes from this person, not the city's, we're not even, go
Let
ahead.
me interject. We promised that we would, address the water standby charges as well. That's someone has to look at
This
the,
one's an easy fix to where there's millions of dollars there that we can add to our general fund in property taxes, by hiring just one person that's dedicated to go through our records line by line.
and water standby at the same time.
Yeah, they can,
We promised we would do this.
kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
So these are things we're just seeing that's not allocated in the budget, and it's not any fault of yours, Andy, because you don't know about them. And so these are things I wanted to bring to you so that if you haven't heard of them before, and they need to be in our budget, just certain things.
City manager, is there any person that is currently working for the city that has the capability that we could move over and accomplish that task?
We are spread very thin. We've got, everybody's doing 2 jobs. So no, right now there's not.
Give her the people to do these things. One person that can make us $1 million is something we need to do, and with the budget freeze, you can't do it. Because, I've told the city manager about this, we, all the way back to Wheel, to Stockwell, and to, Miss Lynn here, and her hands are tied with this freeze, to bring in a basic person, that can do this job and bring in revenue to the city, a lot of revenue to the city.
And I agree.
So it is not your fault at all, it's our fault because we've got the freeze on, but these are things that, expense lines that need to be added into our budget so that we can allocate them out there.
Councilman Paris, would you entertain making a motion to unfreeze that to possibly bring back, Ms. Green or somebody like her?
I don't know who Ms. Green is.
Rona?
Oh,
Let's not mention names, let's just.
Okay, but
I don't,
okay. I don't think.
we can do that tonight, because
This is the budget.
This is the budget.
That would
But on
unbalance the
Tuesday, we-
budget.
Yes.
There you go. On Tuesday, we can, talk
Can I ask a
about.
clarification on that?
Absolutely.
On the water standby, definitely, I agree, we need to go through and make sure all the proper parcels are included or excluded. That's something that we've talked about and
Has to do that.
needs to be done.
Has to be done.
I wanna be clear, on what you're saying is solely on properties that were owned by the city and were
No,
transferred.
absolutely. I mean, there are so many, errors in our records for property taxes. People are not being charged, like I said, there's millions of dollars just in property
There's
taxes that we're
properties.
not collecting because, they haven't been, we have a guy in town that brings them to me and says, look, I went down this street, there's 5 people that aren't paying property tax, aren't paying this tax or that tax. One person just going street by street by street could make us $1 million.
Does he want a job?
Does he want a job? You know better than that.
It may take a special, a
But-
unique person
no,
who
no,
understands.
I mean,
This was done in 2016. 2016.
what's that?
This is all on, this was done in 2016 by help.
Well, that's you're talking about your water standby fees. I'm talking about property tax. Did he do
I think-
property tax?
I believe they did, yes.
Because, it's my understanding that he did the water, standby fees, but he did not go through the property.
Well, I know
tax
that when
records.
Jan was here, she also went through,
And it shouldn't,
I
you know,
did.
you shouldn't require an engineer to do something that,
well, they didn't have the funds.
we need to look into.
I'm not sure
That's,
myself.
You know, bringing that in, I don't believe that we've done our property, records, so. Every time I turn around, we're seeing more and more that hasn't been done. And, it would be worthwhile to hire one employee just to do it or look into it, you know?
I'm trying to think who's, would be qualified for it. The one problem is that for the water standby fee, you have to have an engineer's report.
But
Okay,
for
that's,
property tax, you do not, okay?
right, but you need that, you're already gonna have to go through all the parcels related to that. And,
Well, I don't wanna pay an engineer, you know,
But I'm
his
saying we
fees
already
just
need-
to look at to see if we need property taxes, when we can hire a person at a reasonable rate to come in. You know, we still have to do a rate study and everything else that an engineer has to do regardless, but I'm not gonna wait for an engineer to do our rate study, our master plan, and have them look at property taxes when we can do it now. You know, in the next couple months, bring in 100, 200, you know, who knows what they can bring in, that's available out there.
yeah, I have no objection to that. I think the only thing would be that it's gotta be something that's gonna satisfy whoever does that water rate study analysis in order to, that engineer needs to be satisfied with whatever that person is presenting. And
What, as far as
so,
property tax records?
yes, because they're basically signing off on an engineer's report that these are the parcels that would be assessed, and these are the ones that are.
I think he's talking about
I think.
two different things,
Right.
not water, what we're just
I
talking about
understand.
property tax.
Yeah, I'm just saying that,
An engineer doesn't have to sign off on property taxes,
correct,
so.
so maybe there's a role for someone,
There is,
just,
you know,
it may be somebody that has some knowledge though of deeds and how that works. That
there is people in mind, but we're not gonna name names, I'll bring them up to the city manager, but it's something that I've been pushing for 2.5 years, and, you know, 2.5 years ago, we could have made the city $2 million, and we haven't. I see, staff out here that are more than qualified to do what we're asking to be done. And, so, I have all the confidence in the people that are sitting here. And I won't, you know, there's not much staff out there, but, any of them out there can do this particular, all you have to do is look the records. You just have to have a computer and just go right down.
Councilmember, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Just so maybe I can understand, exactly what this property tax review is. So you have X number of parcels in California City, and each one of those parcels has an assessor's number, APN number, correct? Assessor's parcel number, that has an assessed value presumably on it, upon which property taxes are assessed, the 1% ad valorem. Are you suggesting that maybe some of those parcels are not paying property tax,
Well,
or?
there's a lot that's not paying. I'm saying there's quite a few that are not assessed any, like the special tax.
There's no assessment value
No
on it?
assessment value on them at all. Not the special tax, regular property tax.
So, the assessed value is a function of the county. So the county assessor creates assessed value for certain properties. So,
But again, if they're not showing up, it's up to us as a city to notify the county and say, hey, these people,
okay, so they're not showing up on some report.
they're not showing up in the
Okay.
county records as being assessed.
So a simple procedure would be to ask Kern County for all of the parcels, that receive, all of the parcels that are,
They have them all listed in the
Exactly.
computer.
and
you
then
know, so
compare what their assessor records.
Well, but they're not gonna give, you know, they're not gonna dedicate the people to do it. We have to dedicate the people to say, hey, county, or go to the, and I forget, you know.
No, they won't dedicate the people, but they should be able to come up with those reports fairly easily.
They're right on the computer right now. We look them up every day. You can look up your property, and see if you're, exactly what you're being assessed. You know, they're not
I
gonna do it.
understand.
So their records are wrong, and it appears that we are losing millions of dollars because of that. It's not good, guys.
Sir?
Mrs. Lynn, maybe I've missed it, but is there a line for a compliance officer for the cannabis taxes that was discussed?
There's not in there.
For the cannabis permits, is it 313,500, is that a good number? Is it a wild projection, or is that a good?
Based on,
It's just
based on what we've received, that's where we came up with those numbers.
Okay. You know, of all the departments that would need an assistant, and to say that some people are doing two jobs, I don't know that all departments, that everybody's doing two jobs. Maybe those that you're observing, but it seems that some departments are somewhat heavy with assistants, and as our city manager, I would think that of all the people, if anybody should have an assistant, I would think that you should have an assistant to be able to carry out your duties. It's just a thought. And then on page 11 of the budget workshop, when we came to the vacancy savings built in for police of 78,650, Mr. Heath had made the statement that the only way to get us to balance is a credit in the budget, what it looks like. And I wrote a note here, we really do not want a vacancy savings. So if we want to hire officers, so when we hire officers, is that immediately gonna knock us out of a balanced budget? If this was done just to balance our budget,
True. Yes, it would.
then I would submit to you that we don't have a balanced budget because we need to hire officers, we wanna hire officers, and this is kind of a, two things come to mind. A shell game, we're moving stuff around in order to be able to say we have a balanced budget. And then secondly, it's kind of, to mirror what Dr. Nick had said, to me, I kind of feel like it's Speaker of the House Pelosi saying just vote for it and then figure out what it says afterwards. And to me, this is almost $800,000 to balance the budget. I hope we hire an officer tomorrow. Not gonna happen, but I wish that we would.
We have at least, and we can ask the chief, I saw 4 of them sitting in his lobby doing, their polygraphs, which means they're very close to being hired, so I don't know exactly how many. Chief, do you have a figure for us?
We started off with 19 in the process, and I think we're down to 4.
And how close are they?
Well, the first one maybe within 30 days.
So that would knock us out again, you know, like you said.
Yeah, but the,
To me, I'm just saying, it seems like an artificial way to say we have a balanced budget, because as soon as we hire an officer, I'd love to see every position filled.
well, that would be nice, but what's gonna be nice about this, what is going to occur, which has never occurred before, is a quarterly and then monthly reports on everything. So we can see, so we can make a good, solid decision in the spending of the money. We haven't had that before, ever.
And I concur with you there, Mr. Mayor. I'm just saying that if we want to hire all these officers, then that should be in the budget, that this is, or we're voting to approve something that we already know.
The problem with that is what the chief just said. When you go to hire somebody, and they go through the backgrounds, or they start the testing process, you are gonna lose people right and left.
Like we done before.
When I went to the academy, with the highway patrol, we started with 132 people, we graduated in 99. And the problem with law enforcement, it is always evolving and it's always changing as far as if you could have 500 people test, at the end of it, you'll be lucky to have 10 that'll be eligible. So to hire all those people won't happen in our
Not
lifetime.
gonna happen, but there's.
And then also, there's no freeze on hiring police officers, so that's not a problem. And again, when you have a budget like this, you're gonna have people who leave the city and you don't need to replace them. So I don't think that, I still would like to see the chief with 40 people one day, but that's just not gonna happen. People, even with the 30% raise that we gave our police and fire, people aren't knocking down the doors to get here.
I'd like to see our department with 19 people, 19 officers working the street, that'd be great.
Mayor and council, and I say this respectfully, so, and objectively. We are reducing the tax, we approved a huge increase, we retroed it. I mean,
It is what it is.
yeah,
I didn't know it got retro though. I was, just to let you know.
yes, I mean, with the lower tax, the increases, that's where our budget sits.
I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Heath was aware of some of the items there that I feel need to be in this budget. Like I said, that's just going through the first 5 pages there, so.
Do you have anything else? Sir?
No, I think that for the budget's not perfect, but, it came as close to being balanced with, again, everything, nothing is ever perfect, but it came close, $61, I don't think you can get any closer than that. It gives us projections for 5 years, which we've been asking for, and that's never been done in this city before. So I think that you guys have done a great job. This will set us up for success next year and the following year, so I'm happy with it, thank you.
Most of my questions have been answered when I brought them to Andy's attention, which was nice. I'm gonna be able to sit down and show me. I think that Andy and Kenny both have done an incredible job. Have done an absolutely incredible job moving the city forward, especially in the financial department. You guys rock. Absolutely rock. And it's, what's promising, what I like to hear is that there's gonna not only be quarterly reports, but monthly reports, true monthly reports, not just numbers to look at. And, I'm kind of excited about it, cause it'll be nice where we can actually say, okay, to truly be able to look at it at a set of numbers and say, can we truly do this? And I hope we can. Or if we can't, we can. The money's not there, the money's not there. But we have an obligation. And just, overall, thank you very much. I mean, you brought something forward that's never been brought before in the history of the city. This type of budget. So, I think it's rocking. You too, sir. You're doing a rocking job. Is anybody from the public? Since we're still on questions.
I have never seen Al jump that fast in his 82 years.
What was that in?
Spanish American systems.
Spanish
Spanish American.
Spanish American War. Oh.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm not a, you sure it wasn't the, Revolutionary War?
You brought it up, I didn't.
You're not that old, Mr. Hudson.
Oh, thank you. I'm working on it. I've got a few things here. The first is the, monthly, quarterly, and the current, budgets and financial reports. Those should contain a, MD&A, management, discussion and analysis.
I don't know if you're on it, it's really hard to hear you.
Oh, it was not on, is that better now?
That's much better.
Okay. There should be, what's called an MD&A, that's a management discussion and analysis with each financial report. And that should come from, and be prepared by, each department to give a, verbal plan of what their planned, events and expenditures are. A good example is Public Works. When the water rate study was done, they were to hire an 8-man dedicated crew to replace the water line that was in the rate study. That plain and simply was not done. You can look at the personnel reports and you'll see that there never has been a dedicated 8-man crew to replace the water lines. Along the same lines, there is no financial report on the cost of the monthly cost and progressive costs of the water line replacement. And that should also include the incomplete line to the complete distance, the incomplete distance. So you have a check and balance right there. So you know the total cost of it. The next thing is that the TDS has been hidden again. You can't track all of the expenditures nor the revenues that is being pumped into it unless you have a separate accounting of the TDS, because that and the airport are $2 million money pit. You can't afford it, much less reopening the Par 3. The grand jury, the Kern County grand jury recommended that the Par 3 close and stay closed because you really can't even afford the TDS. Along the TDS lines, if we're going to fund it, I want a quad. I want a dune buggy. I want the city to pay for all of that because that is the equivalent of funding the TDS for people's recreation when it's not affordable. And Mr. Heat's summary, he pointed out that we really cannot afford it.
Yeah.
The next item is that the police are fully funded for full staffing. So that should be a non-issue to be able to open the application doors and say, come on in. Anybody that wants to apply, you're welcome to. The next thing is the compliance with Measure C. the compliance with, Measure C is the putting of putting money from the cannabis and property taxes into the police and fire fund. There's no wiggle room in there for discussion, that is for the, that's what the voters voted on. You can't change what,
No, we're not gonna change that, we wanna get a compliance person in to help out, get the money for the taxes. Last year, the city only got 53,000, was it, and some change
It's been revised. It's been revised because we've actually collected some of it.
for last year's?
Yeah, we've collected more that needs to be put back into there.
Oh my goodness, shocker.
That is.
Do we have ballpark?
I believe it was, I don't wanna say, but it was more.
Okay, it was,
I was talking to you about it on Thursday when I told you I was revising the report. I haven't finished it though.
okay.
okay, now another, during discussion that the audit report is ready. When is that going to be available to the public?
That's,
They've not come out yet. No, the audit report's not. No, they have everything they need, they still have to come out here.
They still haven't.
It's not completed yet, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because that's the impression that, I received was that, it's ready to go.
they've got all the
It's ready.
information, gotta compile,
It's ready to complete.
and that means they'll come out here to ask their questions.
Okay, and it's a guarantee that we're going to get the monthly financial reports. We haven't had any
Oh, that's,
3 months.
that's going to happen,
That is going to.
that is going to happen,
And the quarterlies,
quarterlies and monthlies, you betcha.
okay, now, one last thing, and that is on the capital projects. Those cannot be in the budget unless they can be completed within a year. Everything, any and all work that, and all projects that cannot be completed in a year.
And we'll be able to farm some of them out if need be, so they're gonna get done.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you, sir.
How you doing? I'm Todd Broussard. For those of you that don't know me, just give you a little bit of background. I've been a resident of California City for nearly 27 years. So I was here back when special tax assessments and all that. I voted for every single time. I own multiple properties, so it cost me a significant amount of money every time I vote yes for it. I'm curious on why we're reducing the special assessment tax when we have $800,000 of vacant police positions that are currently, well, just that, vacant. A couple of other things, I'm on the Parks Commission, and I'm president of Little League. I'm involved with soccer, basketball, anything that has to do with youth programs in the city. I have kids, so I'm involved in that. I see that we're deferring capital expenditures for Parks and Recs, and I understand, because I've been here as long as I have, that when we start making cuts in the budget, and I understand we're trying to get a balanced budget, I mean, I agree that we should have a balanced budget, but Parks and Recs generally gets the hatchet first off every time. I mean, the only time that it probably didn't was when Parks and Recs was included in the special assessment tax. I don't know how long ago that was, probably 15 years ago, maybe. Yeah, maybe more. I just want to say that California City needs things for our kids to do. I mean, if they're not involved and engaged, they're going to be out creating additional work for the police. I mean, you guys know that, right? And I'd like to invite you guys out to tour some of these areas of the Parks and Recs that, I mean, over the years, we've deferred maintenance, we've deferred all of these things year after year after year. And I mean, our Parks Department has taken a hit. I mean, it's not at the level that it should be. I mean, if you come out to our Little League fields, those are the original Little League fields from 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
No, they weren't.
Well,
They weren't.
For the 27 years that I've been out here.
I've been here since '71. That used to be a driving range.
Oh, okay, well, maybe not that long. For 27 plus
Lots were
years.
still soft.
Right, there's fencing that is in desperate need of repair. I mean, jagged, rusty, I mean, it's only a matter of time before a kid gets hurt out there. We did do one positive thing, we got a new playground, okay, and that's great, but I mean, Parks and Recs needs to be funded. I understand you're deferring most of the capital expenditures to try to balance the budget, but at what cost? I mean, if the kids don't have anywhere to go.
On a lot of the capital expenditures, if they can show it and justify it, and based on that, and I mean, good solid information that we get, you know, for example, like say, we need a new vehicle for the sake of argument. Okay, so how much does this vehicle cost? X amount of dollars. Okay, then where's the other stuff? You know, we want it detailed in where we get all that information. So and that's one thing that the council decided, that if there's things that are gonna be deferred, they can still be brought into play, correct?
Right, and I understand that. I'm just saying historically,
Historically, Parks and
and
Recs has been hammered.
they're the whipping boy every time
No
there's a
argument.
budget crisis.
No,
But I have to say, not in this budget, okay? This budget is not. And what you, like, people are, what are you gonna do when the Measure C runs out? And say it stayed at 182.50, and we didn't do anything to try and live within a budget. When 182 runs out, and the people say that you guys didn't reduce it as you promised you would, and they vote no on Measure D, then what are you gonna do then?
But we're reducing it before we're funding the appropriate positions.
So we're funding positions. What we're doing is we are reducing it, and the money is going into reserves, which we can use later if we have to. But you have to learn to live within a budget, and that's what we're trying to do, live within a budget. And that's across the board. Now, we have not, fire and police can still hire. They can still hire. But we're trying to make it so that the city, if you remember, the previous city manager wanted to reduce it where, big drastic thing where we went down to, if Measure C didn't pass, we would have 4 policemen in the city.
Understood. I remember.
And so we need to do, what we need to do is go on a diet and learn to be as efficient as we can, so that when this Measure C ends, that we have grown the marijuana business, the cannabis business. We have grown everything that we can, brought as many businesses to the city as we can, and so that we can stay viable as a municipality. If we don't do that, we are in jeopardy of becoming just a part of the county. And if we become part of the county, guess what happens to the cannabis industry? It goes away. So we are trying to work with that. If you talk to, make an appointment, this is my recommendation to you, make an appointment with the city manager, and she can explain to you that those cuts are everywhere. They're everywhere. They're not on, we're not trying to kill Parks and Recreation. We're not trying to kill anybody. What she's done is she's given us a budget that gets us healthy. And so what we can look at is, if there is no Measure D, that we'll still be viable as a city. We're looking long range. And if you notice, Mr. Heath gave you projections for 5 years. We paid 20% this year for increase to fire and police in their salaries. Next year, I believe it's 8%, am I right? 8%, and the next year after that is 2%. But those, we are absorbing over 3 years, 30% increase in their salaries. In addition to trying to cut the so-called fat that we can from the budget. And there is, you know, if we're honest with ourselves, there is fat, you know, and you look at your own personal budget, all of us, we can see fat in our budget. So I think the finance department under Ms. Lynn, they've given us a great budget. It's not perfect, as I said, there's things that I'm not happy with, but the two major points the two takeaways that are very important are, we have a balanced budget, $61 in the positive, and we have a projection for 5 years, so we can mitigate. We know that next year, there's gonna be a $200 and something thousand dollar deficit, so we can start mitigating that, and that's basically paying, for CalPERS, I think it is, or something like that, right? Yeah, so we can mitigate that, start mitigating that now, and I think we have a couple more years that we're gonna have huge, deficits that we can take care of. But in the end, by the time 24, 25 comes around, we'll set ourselves up for success, and if there is no Measure D, we can still be viable and still exist as a municipality.
Understood, sir.
Real quick, I wanted to let you know that we have all these cannabis people coming to us saying, what can we do to help the city? What can we do to help the Little League? What can we do? So anything you need, you can come to me, you can come to the city manager. We will approach these cannabis people and say, hey, this is what the president of the Little League says that he really needs this year, let's produce it.
And I actually approached a lot of the cannabis people to try to get sponsorships for this previous baseball season, and got zero results from most of them. That was gonna be my next point, was to get with you guys. I went to all the city council meetings and all the promises of, community betterment, community improvement, and all these things that the cannabis industry was gonna do for our city, and it's been a couple years now, and I really haven't seen any of that come to fruition. And it's a little bit disappointing, because I understand the city's under budget constraints, I understand that. Little League's the same way. 70% of our kids that play baseball don't pay to play baseball because they can't afford to pay to play baseball. So we go out to our local community, to the businesses, and raise money to try to fund that. My point is I would like to bring some of the council members and maybe yourself, Mayor, out and tour these areas and see that there really is a need to try to build up. The park used to be beautiful. 30 years ago, 27 years ago, the park was beautiful. It was a different city back then. I remember when we had the movie theater, and I remember when we had the bowling alley. I remember all of these things. I've been in the area that long. I would love for us to get back to that, but people don't want to live here if there's nothing for the children to do. And that was just my point. I just wanted to make sure that there was an advocate saying that we have to have something for our youth to do out here.
We agree with you. I mean, I grew up playing Little League, Major League, went all the way up to Legion Ball. So, I mean, and played in high school and college. So I understand that. And sports are, you know, as you pointed out, sports, kids who grow up playing sports their whole life, you're not gonna see them in jails usually, you know, they take a different path.
So it's not just Little League. I mean, like I said, there's plenty of youth sports programs out here. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure that you understood that there are people out here. A couple hundred kids play baseball, 100 and something kids play soccer, basketball. I mean, there's programs available, but we want to continue to keep having these programs, and to do that, we're going to need help from the city, maybe the cannabis industry, and whoever else is out there that can pitch in and try to make these programs better and build them rather than watching them deteriorate, which they have over the last several years. So,
You know, they say no to you, but they may not say no to us. So if you bring what you feel you need, if, you know, the fencings are bad to where we're gonna get our kids hurt, let us know, and we'll go and talk to these people and see if we can get them to take care of these problems for you.
I absolutely will.
Yeah,
And I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, give the information, give the information to the city manager.
All right.
You know, that what you haven't seen in the budget is that the revenue that we're putting into our projections for next year is 18% less than last year. 18%. I don't think the city has ever addressed Proposition 218, where the city has to pay for the services just like, the ordinary citizen did. That's what happens, that's what has decimated the park. The water bill for the city, at least was supposed to be last year, was supposed to be 1.2 million, which is 25% of our revenue. 25% is just to pay the water bill. Now, that doesn't pay for employees,
Doesn't pay for anything except water.
water,
That's it.
it's a mess. Parks and Rec, right now, if you put Tierra del Sol and the Parks Department, and the water bill is 25% of the general fund. That's unheard of in any other city on this earth. It just doesn't happen. And because we can't address the water issue with how significant a cost it is to the city, I don't even know how to deal with it, to be honest with you. I do know in the book, I think I was gonna say is that last year, they earned more money and spent, and well, I can't say they, can I? It was me. But we, the end of the year, 18-19, we spent $1 million more than we took in. And what happens is that there are structures in our spending that are just never gonna fix. And this budget is closest to actually putting our feet to the fire and saying, if you want a balanced budget, then you have to say no to spending money. But I'm just trying to tell you that 218 just hammered the city, and that's a huge issue of the city using its water to have green grass in the park, a median with plants alive in it, Tierra del Sol green grass.
So, and you're hoping that when they do another water survey, that you're gonna be able to reduce.
Correct.
And I understand that, and that's positive.
And maybe scale back the amount of pipe that we have, that we try to repair with each year to the in the water department.
There's a lot of broken water lines. I know most of the stuff that they're replacing it as it's necessary to replace it because it's breaking and spilling valuable, obviously costly water all over the streets, so.
Public Works Director, Ron Wallace said that to actually have a dent in water line repairs, we would have to replace roughly 40% of the water lines in town before you would actually start to see a reduction in the cost of personnel for repairing the broken lines. 40%. That's I think that's at 5 miles a year, which we've not done yet. And I think that's either 25 or 30 years in the future. So we could keep doing the 5 miles a year, and 30 years from now, maybe we can even turn up the water pressure. We don't even have a plan to fix the water lines in this town, really. I mean, it's a problem of infrastructure that's getting old, and no way to finance repair or replacement of it.
Well, just to let you guys know, I'll vote for the tax every time you guys put it on the ballot, so. And I know there's a lot of other citizens out there that are in agreement with that, not the spec guys that went out and bought a bunch of property that don't wanna fund it because they got non-performing assets until they build or do whatever they do with it, but I know, like I said, I want programs for my kids. That's really the only reason I cut my soccer practice to come over and talk to you guys. I just want you guys to know that it's important to me. It's important to most of the families that I coach or whatever. And a lot of them don't come to the city council meetings. They don't, I mean, they're busy with their lives, with their kids, with doing all of this other stuff and that. But I know it's important to them because I see them on a daily basis. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that it is important that their kids have something to do out there. And I know I'm way beyond my 3 minutes, and I absolutely apologize for that, guys.
Thank you, sir.
And, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Creighton, California City. I literally just got here, or not just got here, I got here just before the meeting started from the airport. I've been gone since last week out of state. So I didn't really get a chance to look at the budget that was online. But a quick question, Mr. Heath, on the, summary pages that you provided in the front, you mentioned that some of those numbers still needed to be reviewed. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So they're not hard, fast, not totally vetted,
Not completely.
so which means they're not completely out of the budget yet.
And we discussed that, right. And
Okay.
salary allocations, those sorts of things where you can look at.
Thank you, something to keep in mind. On your issue with the 50,000 from Mojave, if indeed it needs to be, for projects at the airport, got a roof repair project, a replacement project with HVAC. Also, Councilman Stump turned down the replacing of the, carpet within the restaurant out there. So there's where some of that money could go. Also, since you brought up capital improvement, that $4 million water line, if that's an in-house cost and you contract it out, it's gonna skyrocket. And also, I don't know if you've contacted the railroad yet, otherwise that line is gonna dead end at the railroad.
Yeah, that's already been addressed, and we've got, that's why the general, plan is being addressed, and the water rate study is being done, is gonna cover all that.
And also, I'm still waiting on that $450,000 street project that's in capital. You're gonna give me some details on that before you had to leave.
I will give it to you.
Beg pardon?
Yeah, I ended up leaving last week, but I'll.
I know.
Yeah.
And also finally, Councilman Stump, you said that you were not happy with everything that's in this current budget. But I sat in this chamber a couple of years ago and listened to you berate a finance manager at the time for literally $1.50 mistake. Just saying.
Okay, the budget before, if you wanna bring that up, the budget before was,
I'm not talking about the budget. You said you weren't happy about everything that's in this.
I've
You
talked,
weren't happy about what was not in that, or what was in that, but an error. So there are errors in this, and yet you're willing to pass it.
these errors are not as bad as the errors that were in that one.
It's not
That
my
was
point.
that
That's
was
not my point.
what, my point is, since you brought this up, my point is that budget was in error. This budget is close to being, this is the best budget that I've seen since I've been here, the best. And I had talked to the city manager and to Mr. Heath, and I've told them the things that I'm not happy with, they know, but they're minor things. This budget,
$1.50 was minor too.
there are more things than that. You're missing the whole point.
No, I made my point.
You're
Thank you
missing
for
the
your time,
point.
sir.
You're missing the point. So,
Anybody else? Not seeing anybody else, bringing it back up here. This is where it's, anybody else got any? So, city attorney, are we gonna roll into, CV1 with this? Pardon? Cause I'm ready to roll into it.
Yeah.
Okay,
That would be the next step.
okay, the workshop, so we're going into CB1, adoption and operation budget, fiscal year, 2019-2020. Recommendations, is, adopt a resolution number 9192809 of the City of California City, or the City Council of California City, approving the fiscal year 2019-2020 final budget. Looking for a motion to approve. And I'll make that motion right from the get-go. Pardon?
Public comment on CD1.
Come on up. No, because this one is next week. Okay. Yes, sir. My apologies.
All right. I see I can do that in the evening too. How in the heck can you pass a budget when there is a continuing a 218 violation that dramatically affects the water rates? You can't do it.
Well, that's why, that's what this, let me explain something. With this, we're doing a new water rate study from ground zero.
I understand that,
You gotta have the money to pay for it.
but still, there are major problems with 218 violations. Those have not been corrected in this budget, so therefore, how can you pass it at this time? You need to get there and continue this budget until those corrections are made. Also, there's another question that I have. We were 2 months, almost 3 months on the 18-19 budget. And those totaled approximately $2 million. Where is that $2 million expenditure shown in this budget? It's not, we couldn't find it. 1.5? 1.5. Darn near, but still, where is it shown? It's not. So therefore, those corrections have to be made before you can approve this budget. You don't know how much money you have.
As far as that, yeah.
And so therefore, this has to be tabled until those questions are answered. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Coming back up here? I'm making a motion that we approve, and we can move forward and get this thing on the road, get the show on the road. This budget has been, it's not perfect by any stretch of the means, but this is the best that the city's ever seen in its history. And that will give us the opportunity with the monthly reports and the quarterly reports that we can do our jobs and we can do our jobs correctly. So I'm making a motion that we approve.
I will second that. I think that, again, not perfect, but it's as close as we're gonna get. I think you guys have done a great job. It'll get us on the right road, and, next year, get even closer and narrow it down. Again, if we have the same team, I think that, again, you guys have done a great job on finding, where things are. There are people, outside people who've given us, their ideas, and it's not that we're not listening to them, we are. We listen to Mr. Hudson, we listen to J.M. Powers, we listen to everybody. But what we have here is, on the right path. I think, and again, I think you guys have done a great job, so, I'm willing to support, and proceed with this budget.
We've got a first and a second, Madam Clerk. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Lucinovich,
No.
Harris,
No.
Smith,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Stump,
Yes.
Mayor McGuire.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Okay, going to CB2, proposed resolution approving our interim expenditures through October 31 of 2019. Anybody from the public? This will be a status quo from last month.
Status quo. And, yes, because the city needs to operate, but still, those funds need to be accounted for in the budget as are the previous months that were on the extended budget.
Thank you, sir. Bring it up here. Looking for a motion to approve.
Well, before, just a little discussion. So the majority of my colleagues up here do not like what they see. I really request that you take the time between now and the end of October 31st, to look at any and all items that you're not happy with. I think that Mr. Heath and Ms. Lynn and Mr. Cooper will, go over those items with you. Hopefully during that time, we will get an unqualified, assessment from the auditors. And once we get that, you can talk to them, and hopefully they can satisfy any questions that you have. But now is the time to start that process, you know, tomorrow actually. And hopefully, the budget, I just request that you guys give it balance to us like you did this time. Take into account, since it's not going forward, one item that, and I mentioned it to you, city manager, I went and visited the police department, and Amanda can tell you and the chief can tell you, but they might want to shift around the monies that they have because their infrastructure is not good. It's hanging on by strings, literally almost. So maybe the chief can move some money around and fix that. Again, all this will give us a month to fine tune what we already have, but please do not stray from the process as you've done. And any of Councilman Paris and Lucinovich and Smith's ideas that they feel are wrong, take those. Thank you.
Going back, looking for a recommendation, again, this is proposed resolution approving interim expenditures through October 31, 2019. Adopt a resolution number 919-2810 of the City Council of the City of California City approving interim expenditures prior to adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Looking for a motion to approve, or we shut the doors?
Motion to approve.
Looking for a second? Got a first and a second?
Councilmember Lucinovich,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stump,
Yes.
Mayor McGuire.
Yes.
Motion carried.
And with that, before everybody forget, make sure you turn your phones back up. Turn on and turn the volumes up. Looking for a motion, get out of here.
I'll make that motion.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. See, I remember.
You did.